Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Much Talk About Nothing or Through the Monocle, depending on where you're watching. Today, Grant and I got to interview Margaret Hoelzer, who was an Olympic swimmer who won 2 silver medals in the 2008 Olympics. She was fantastic to talk to, and it's a great interview, but I will give you a warning, Grant accidentally recorded his audio through his webcam, so his audio is a little off, but other than that, it's a great interview that I know you'll enjoy. Without further ado, let's get into it.
So, Margaret, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing great. So happy to be talking to you. It's been a long time coming, and we are very excited. So, you obviously are widely known for your swimming achievements. How did you get into swimming?
Oh, man. Well, I'm from Alabama originally, and I think it's like 95 degrees there right now, and it's supposed to go up into the hundreds. So it's real hot in the South and real humid. And so being in the water was kind of just a natural thing that we all did because you're either inside in the air conditioning or you're in the water. So I started with summer league, and then I have an older sister who was on our summer league team. So I think my mom just threw me in the minivan, and along I went to swim practice with her, and then she discovered she hated swimming, and I discovered I liked swimming. So that's how that went. And then a couple of years later, I guess I was 5. And a couple years later, when I was 7, they had a program that was called Early Birds that one of the local club teams ran. And it was basically, I think you started like a month or 6 weeks before summer league started. And the idea was, obviously getting kids into, club swimming, but with the mindset of you're getting an extra amount of time for summer league. And so I was like, what? Like, I'm going to get to start a month before everybody else. Like, obviously I'm going to be better than all of them with this extra month of training. And so, their marketing plan worked. It got me suckered in, and then the rest is history.
Wow. So at what point did you realize that you could do it professionally?
Oh, man. I don't know. I mean, at some point, I think when I was in college, I definitely knew that there were people that did it beyond college. I don't know that I'd thought about it a ton since then. Maybe even in high school, I realized that there were people like Jenny Thompson and Dara Torres that did it, into their 20s and 30s. But I don't know if I thought I could do that. I know for a long time the goal was just swimming in college, and then I think it just kind of morphed from there.
And you swam with Auburn, correct?
Yep, swam at Auburn.
Is that with David Marsh?
Yep.
Okay. So how was the recruiting process? How did you end up at Auburn?
Yeah. So I actually didn't want to go to Auburn in the beginning, just because I'm from Alabama. I felt like I needed to, go to just live in a different state, try something different. And so my club coach actually, David had talked to him and said they were really interested. And my club coach was like, okay, Margaret, like, this coach is kind of important, and I don't want to piss him off, because if I ever have another kid that wants to go to Auburn, like, I want him to like me. So can you at least just go on like an unofficial trip? And I was like, all right, like that, that doesn't count against me. So I was like, sure, I can do that. And so I went on an unofficial trip to Auburn, and I had all my official trips other places, and then fell in love with it on my unofficial trip. And I had a trip left, and so that I hadn't used. And so then I decided to take an official trip and, seal the deal there.
I guess it worked out.
Yeah, it did. It did.
So did you enjoy swimming under, I guess, Mr. Marsh, David Marsh?
Yeah. Coach Marsh, David, I did. David was great. So we had about 6 coaches at the time. David and Kim Bracken, and then 2 assistant coaches. And then there were always 2 grad assistants that were kind of rotating in and out depending on where they were with school. But David was always my coach. So people would kind of gravitate towards one of the 6. Sometimes it was based on what stroke they did or what their event was. And David kind of was a floater. I mean, he oversaw everything. So he didn't have like a specific group, but he did have specific athletes, I guess. And I sort of gravitated towards him my freshman year. And, he was always the person that I looked to as my coach.
Okay. And so after Auburn, what was the next step for you?
Swimming professionally. And it really wasn't that different, to be honest, than what I was doing when I was in college. So especially back in those days, they didn't really have training facilities for professionals. And so what you did was you just stayed at your university, because all of the best coaches in the world were college coaches. And so I just stayed at Auburn for 2 extra years and, decided to continue training there. And then at some point, I think they started the first professional training group, I want to say in like 2007. And so David actually moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And then I did move up there and follow him to one of the training groups there. And then eventually I ended up switching coaches and training out in Seattle. But yeah, for the most part, everybody just kind of stayed where they were. So it didn't really feel that different than it was when I was in school.
Makes sense. What's the life like of a professional swimmer? Like, how does swimming pay the bills, I guess?
So it's not too different, I imagine, than most professional athletes. Being professionals just simply means that you get paid, right? And so the majority of your income is going to come from sponsorships. So especially when I was swimming, there weren't a ton of outside sponsorships. And what I mean by that is you weren't sponsored by like AT&T or things that weren't related to swimming. I mean, a couple people were, Amanda Beard, Michael Phelps, right? Like they were getting real sponsorships. But the rest of us, we were just swimming specific sponsorships. So Speedo, Nike, Tier, typically your companies that made the majority of the equipment, the swimsuits, that kind of thing. So I had a Speedo sponsorship and was sponsored by them, and that was my main source of income. And then there are other things like that the USA Swimming or the US Olympic Committee does to help with that. And then of course there's prize money, but the majority of your income comes from sponsorships.
Okay. I would say I grew up swimming and I always was like curious as to how you guys made money. Mm-hmm. So at that point, how you started swimming professionally. So obviously the Olympics is a goal. Mm-hmm. What was the qualification process for the Olympics like?
Well, so I made my first Olympic team when I was in college. And then my second team when I was professional. And it doesn't change, right? Like that's irrelevant from the standpoint. It doesn't matter if you're a professional or not. Because you are allowed to accept money actually if you win at the Olympics, even if you're a college athlete. Of course, now all the rules are completely different. But even back then you were allowed to accept money. And so in terms of making the team, in the US, we have Olympic trials, and then essentially you just have to get top 2. There are time standards that you have to get, which is how a lot of countries, especially smaller countries, pick their athletes. It's based on time standards. The time standards matter for us as well, but we have so many people that hit the time qualifications that's why we have an Olympic trials, because the top 8 people, in finals all hit that time standard. And so it's not something that comes up very often. I believe actually at this last Olympic trials, and this is the first time in history that I'm aware of, the 400 freestyle, there was a guy that didn't make the time standard, the guy that got second in the 400 free. And so there was this big question of, is he going to be able to go or is he not going to be able to go? And then I think he time trialed it and did make the time. But then they were overqualified, and I think he might not have gotten to go anyways. I don't remember the specifics on that. But the point is I do remember him not making it. And that's the first time that I've ever seen that happen, at least since the late 80s, when I remember like actively starting to watch the Olympic Games and like have some semblance of knowledge about what was going on.
So I guess then, first off, that's crazy. Like just that you can beat everyone in the country and not go.
Yeah, that is kind of crazy.
But so once you got, I guess, to the Olympic trials, what was your trials experience like, say, for 2008?
2008, it was awesome. 2008, I broke the world record at the Olympic trials, and I made the team in the 100 back, which I was not expecting to. And so, I mean, I had a great trials experience. Some people will argue that Olympic trials are more stressful than the Olympic Games themselves. I don't think they're more stressful. I think they're stressful in a very different way, because making the U.S. team is so difficult that typically if you make the U.S. team, you're automatically a medal favorite, because that's how strong the U.S. is in both the women and the men. And so in some ways, like I said, as a whole, I would say the U.S. has more depth in terms of like I said, normally you have 8 to 16 people that are going to make that qualification standard. But when you go to the Olympics, what's hard is, other countries may not have 8 people that are that good, but they don't need 8 people. They just need 1, right? So the best people in the world are going to be faster at the Olympic Games, but the Olympic trials has more depth. So it's harder to make the team, if that makes sense.
You have to get that first step. First, you have to get there.
Yeah. So it's a huge relief just to get through trials and just kind of get that, off your back. And then honestly, to know that you're a medal favorite, and then you can just kind of focus on the next thing is really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with his video, but
I don't know what's going on.
But so once you make the team, what is the experience like as an athlete at the Olympics? Like, and then like when you're talking about pressure, how much pressure do you feel like when you're getting ready to start your dive and go in swimming? How does that, like, how much pressure are you feeling at that moment?
I think it's individual. So pressure honestly never really bothered me. Most Olympians will not say that, but I never really got nervous. I honestly do better when there's more pressure. Like, I need the pressure just to make it real, if that makes sense. I had a really hard time in season at meets that didn't matter because I knew they didn't matter, and I couldn't fake it. I couldn't pretend that they mattered. And so I would be a terrible actress because the whole idea of like doing dress rehearsals, like I would be awful in the dress rehearsal every time, and no one would hire me because they'd think I'd never be able to do it in the real show. And so I really need the pressure to kind of make the stakes higher and then be like, oh, okay, like this is for real. Like I have to perform now. So I actually really, really liked that and preferred that. But I think part of it is just grounding yourself and remembering what are the constants, what do you know? And there are certain things that are going to be the same, whether you're at a little tiny meet or nationals or at the Olympics. And then just focusing on the fact that I'm like, how many thousands of 200 backstrokes have I done in my life, right? Like, it's just focusing on those things and not letting the outside stuff get to you.
Makes sense. So as far as like the actual staying at the Olympics, the food, the hotels, all that, what is that like?
Yeah, the village is cool. So it's interesting because in some ways the accommodations are nicer at like the World Championships and some of the lower level meets, just because you're being put up by a smaller group and you're staying in a hotel and they're just focusing like on the US, right? Like each country is doing their country, right? The Olympics is such a big production that it's just massive, right? So everything's nice, but nothing is catered to any one group of people or any one country. So like even in the cafeteria, it literally, like the food, it's a cafeteria. I mean, they're trying to feed thousands and thousands of people. And so the food is just really, really generic because, I mean, how many different types of, food are there that people eat from different types of the world? So I remember it kind of being clumped into like, at least what I thought of as like 3 categories. Like I felt like you had like your meat and potatoes kind of food, you had your salad, and then there was this sort of like Asian cuisine. But it was all, like I said, like fairly generic because I think they were just trying to accommodate such large groups of people that they couldn't do super specialized.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a bunch of different diets. Like a runner's going to have a different diet from, I don't know, I'm blanking on something else. But
No, but you're right. I mean, swimming, running, like we're all so different. And then, like I said, like I don't know what people in, certain countries in Africa eat or, in the Middle East or, you know what I mean? And then obviously you have religious like preferences like in there in terms of like what they eat, meat, no meat, like all these different things. And so it would be crazy trying to come up with, I can't even imagine being in charge of like figuring out how to do that.
I think I'd pull my hair out. Sounds awful.
Yeah.
So just something else I'm curious about. What would you say was the biggest contributing factor to your success as a swimmer?
Biggest contributing factor. Wow. I think I am abnormally stubborn. So, I always tell kids when I do swim clinics, I'm like, coaches like to use big fancy words in the athletic world, and they like this word that they throw around called determination. And I'm like, determination is literally being too stubborn to quit something. It's like what that word means. So I am really, really stubborn, which is good for an athlete, but not necessarily always good in every area of life. So I think as an adult, it's figuring out, picking and choosing your battles. That's always a big saying for me, and figuring out when to do it. So I think that was something that personally helped me out because, everybody goes through slumps. Everybody goes through hard times. Everybody has days where they just don't want to be at practice. You don't want to wake up, so it's figuring out what motivates you and how do you get through that. And I'm sure everybody has their own little unique ways that they do it. But I would say to some extent, we're all pretty stubborn because every single one of us at some point wanted to quit. We just didn't for whatever reason. So, yeah.
And then I guess on the other side of that, what would you say was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome in your career?
Biggest hurdle? I had a lot of plateaus. So I think being stubborn was good. But I had a 4-year plateau from 14 to 18, didn't improve at all in anything. I had another 3.5-year plateau from, let's see, that was 2004 to 2007. So 21 to 25. And that one wasn't as bad in the fact that it wasn't in everything, but it was in my best event, which was, the moneymaker. So that was kind of hard. But having those plateaus, and they're really common, I know another Olympic athlete that had a 7-year plateau, so it happens all the time, but it's really, really hard because you get to that point and you're talking about dropping tenths, hundredths of a second, right? Like long gone are the days of dropping like a second or like more, you're happy to drop little teeny tiny amounts. And so it's just hard to get those improvements. And so sometimes it's hard to stay motivated.
I guess that's where that stubbornness comes in.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned a minute ago, and kind of with the plateau, it almost in some way, I don't know, in my head connects with it, but you mentioned you got a world record. What was that like? Like, how did you feel after you got the world record?
Relieved. It had been a goal of mine for a really, really long time. And I think I was capable of doing it long before I actually did it. And I think there's a lot of mental preparation in there. And I think I just didn't mentally believe that I could do it. And so I think physically I could have done it. And so it was just getting to that point where I felt like I was allowed to be that good and I was okay with being that good. Because that sounds kind of silly, but it's hard. Like it's crazy to think of yourself sometimes as being that successful, as being good, as the people that you idolize, right? And putting yourself in that category. And so I think there was a point that it just took me a while to get to that point. And so then, the point at which I accepted that, I knew I would break the world record. So when I did it, I wasn't surprised. I actually called my mom at Olympic trials the morning of, and I was like, hey, I'm going to break the world record tonight. So you should pay attention, so I wasn't surprised, but it took a long time just to get to that point. So it was kind of nice just to take that breath and go like, okay, cool. Like check that off the list now.
I want to take a second to point out that the person who had the world record before you broke it was also an Auburn swimmer, right?
Yes.
It was Coventry. Is that?
Yep.
Yep.
She had broken it about 6 months before, and then before that, it had been held for like 19 or 20 years. So Kirsty and I had both been gunning for the same record, and then she broke it, I broke it, and then she broke it back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Auburn just had the world record for a good while.
For a while. And Kirsty and I had been going back and forth for years at that point, in college and then, at all the different international competitions. So, we'd trained together. We'd actually lived together at one point. And so we knew each other very well. And honestly, there was a lot of familiarity there, which was good because I knew how she trained. I knew how she raced, but she held me accountable. Like I always knew she was going to bring it. So I couldn't show up anywhere and ever slack off. Not that you would intentionally, but like, it's good having people like that because they make you better because that, and hopefully I made her better in the same way that she knew that I was going to bring it as well.
That is, I would imagine, the toughest thing when you're at that level is to find people who can challenge you.
Consistently. I mean, I think there's always people, but I liked having the same person versus having it be a bunch of different people. I don't know, maybe other people would like different people, but like I said, I thought it was nice having it be the same person because I did know her and I did like her, right? Like we were friends. And so I wanted her to be successful in addition to wanting to be successful myself. And I was happy for her when she had successes. And so I liked that, but also it made it nice from a standpoint of like, I always like to know my competitor's race strategy. And so I knew hers, you know what I mean? And I mean, she knew mine too. It wasn't like a secret, but you know, I think that was kind of nice versus somebody that was training in some other part of the world. And I'm like, well, you know, seen them swim a few times, but
you don't know the person and know how they train, and I imagine, like you said, it's almost like a friendly competition of you're both
Mhm.
there and you're friends, but the fact that you're both so good and so close helps to push both of you to get better and like
Exactly.
push the sport forward too. Because at that point, you're fighting for a world record. Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
So you mentioned race strategy. So you hit the water, 200 backstroke. What's going through your head? Like, what is your plan? How do you execute, or you just go the whole way?
Yeah. For me, I was a back halfer. So the challenge for me was always staying as relaxed as possible on the first 100 and just not being too tense. I would say probably since 2003, my second 100 was on race pace for the world record. But then my first 100 was like 2 or 3 seconds slower. So I had to figure out how do I get my first 100 faster, but I had to figure out how to do it and stay relaxed because if I just went all out like I was swimming a 100, then I was so exhausted that I couldn't bring the second 100 back. And I am not a sprinter in any shape of the word. And I say that because even in my 100 backstroke, I had to completely relearn how to swim the 100 backstroke. Like I didn't swim it traditionally like most 100 swimmers at all. Like I swam it like a 200 swimmer. I back halved it. Because when I try to sprint, I slip. I don't pull any water. I get exhausted. And then when I get exhausted, that's actually when I start holding onto the water because my tempo slows down so much. And so it was constantly this battle of where's the line of being as relaxed and as easy as possible, but still going hard. Because there is a point where if you go too easy, you just never get going. Right. And then the whole thing is just slow. And that would happen to me sometimes. Like I would just swim slow, you know what I mean? And so it was like, it's finding like, where is that line of relaxed, not too hard, relaxed, not too slow. Because I had a big enough engine that I could bring the second 100 back, but I had to, you know, I had to rust it the first half.
Right. That's, yeah, I've never really thought about the differences. I mean, I swam, but like the difference between a sprinter and a more of a long distance. I quit swimming before there was much of a difference.
Fair.
Yeah. So I've got one more like swimming related question. What advice would you give to an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old who wants to go to the Olympics and wants to make it? What would you tell them?
I mean, hold on to that dream, right? Like hold on to that dream and just don't give up. I mean, within that, you have to be realistic. And all I mean about being realistic is you have to work hard, right? You have to do things you don't want to do, especially in this day and age. I think there's sometimes an expectation that, well, I don't want to do that. And so therefore I don't have to. And you're right, you don't have to. And if you don't do it, you're not going to make the Olympic team. Like plain and simple. Like, you know what I mean? So yes, life is about choices and you can choose to not do things that you don't want to do. But that choice also is a decision to then not reach your goals. And so I think it's just being honest with yourself about things. Like I'm the first person to admit, like, I am not a morning person. I did morning workouts for 15 years and hated every single minute of it. Every single coach that sits there and tells you your body will adjust, like they are full of, you know, like just being honest, like your body will not adjust at all. You just simply suck it up and you do it. Like that's, you know, like I hated it, but I understood its value. I understood why they wanted me to do it. And I do believe that it did help me. So it's one of those things that you just have to prioritize and say, is it more important to sleep in this moment or are my goals more important? And now as an adult, sleeping is almost always important. There's very rare that at this point in my life, you know, I think, you know, so I mean, it's like I said, and I do have the ability to choose that, but it's I think it's sometimes explaining to kids kind of those differences and that you do have to make those sacrifices, and they are the ones in charge of it. And there's a lot of power there. But you do have to do things you don't want to do, and that's okay. But also understanding that you're not always going to win. It's not always going to be fun. It's not always going to be smooth sailing. Like, there are going to be those rough patches and those things that you don't enjoy. And, but the reward, if you stick it out, is so worth it that, I don't look back at any of those things and regret any of it. I can acknowledge I didn't like it, but I don't regret doing any of it.
So you would say going to the Olympics was worth the 15 years of morning practice?
100%. 100%. And then now as an adult, I don't wake up early pretty much ever. So, like I said, I also get to make those choices.
The dream.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what do you do now that I assume you're still involved in swimming in some capacity, but what do you do now outside of swimming?
Well, so I'm a public speaker, so that's my full-time job. I do teach private swim lessons as well, so I am still connected there. For a long time, I did volunteer work with USA Swimming and was on a bunch of different committees. But my eligibility for doing that is up, so I don't do that as much anymore. But so I teach private lessons and, like I said, speak, and pretty much get to make my own schedule with both of those professions. There are times, obviously, when I have to wake up. Especially if I have a 7 a.m. speaking event, but for the most part, I get to make my own schedule, which has been lovely.
Sounds a lot better than morning practice.
Yes.
So public speaking wise, is it all swimming related, or do you do like business conferences? What type of speaking do you do?
So it's actually not swimming related at all. So I speak on sexual abuse. And I myself am a survivor and went public with that information in 2008. And so I pretty much speak about that, and with different organizations, around the country that are involved with prevention and helping kids that have been through it. So, yes, I am hired because I was an Olympian. But other than that, it's not swimming specific.
That's important work.
Mm-hmm.
I know that affects a lot of kids, and it's very bold of you to speak out about that.
Thank you.
Grant, do you have any more questions?
I don't think I have any other questions.
I don't think I do either. Is there anything you'd like the people to know about? Anything you'd like to plug while we're here?
Gosh, off the top of my head, no.
Instagram, anything like that?
I am on all the social medias. It's just my name. The hardest part is the spelling. But I'm on all of them. Is
that Margaret _Hoelzer? Is that correct?
Yes. For Instagram, it's _, and then I think everything else, it's just Margaret Hoelzer.
Okay. Awesome. Just wanted to make sure people knew where to find you. I follow you, see a lot of the swimming questions you answer. It's well worth a follow. She's fantastic.
Thank you. Yes, I did recently start doing a thing called Any Question, which has been a lot of fun. And it's the majority of them are swimming questions, but I have gotten a couple of sexual abuse, type questions as well. But it's really neat. It's a bunch of different professionals in just every area under the sun, and you can literally ask anything. So it's been fun answering some of the questions, because some of them are things I would expect, and then there's totally things that I'm like, oh, it never would have occurred to me that somebody wanted to know that, or like, you know what I mean? I'm like, that's a good question. Like, so yeah.
That is awesome. I need to look that up. Like, that's really cool. Well, thank you so much for making the time for us and for coming on. We've thoroughly enjoyed having you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.